My name is Sarah Mitchell, but everyone calls me Sarah. I am 32 years old. And last Wednesday, my entire world shifted when I checked my lottery numbers and discovered I had won $43 million. My hands trembled as I stared at those six numbers that matched perfectly. After the initial shock faded, a strange thought entered my mind. I would tell absolutely no one about this money. You see, I have a complicated relationship with my family when it comes to finances. If you are watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you are viewing from. Before I tell you about this life-changing decision, hit like and subscribe to hear more real stories about family betrayal and loyalty that might just change. How you view your own relationships. Before that fateful Wednesday, my life was predictably ordinary. I worked as a bookkeeper at a small construction company in Denver, making just enough to live somewhat comfortably, but never enough to feel truly secure. My apartment was a modest one-bedroom in a decent neighborhood. Nothing special, but it was mine. Every morning I would wake up at 6:30, make my coffee, and start my day with the familiar worry of bills and expenses weighing on my mind. The job was steady with occasional overtime during busy seasons, but the pay remained frustratingly stagnant. Year after year, my family situation was complicated to say the least. My parents, Robert and Linda Mitchell, divorced when I was 16, and both remarried within 3 years. My father, Robert, a high school history teacher, married Karen, a real estate broker with expensive tastes and even more expensive spending habits. My mother, Linda, found love with David, the successful insurance agent who had accumulated wealth over the years, but guarded every penny like it was his last. I have 2 siblings. My younger brother, Michael, is 28 and has always been the family favorite. He graduated from college with a business degree, married his college sweetheart, Emma, and now lives in a beautiful suburban home with their twin daughters. Then there is my older sister, Jessica, 35, who, despite her intelligence and charm, has never quite found her footing in life. She moves from career to career, relationship to relationship, and has turned asking family members for financial help into something of an art form. The pattern was always predictable: desperate phone call, emotional story, promise to repay, then complete silence until the next crisis emerged. Extended family added another layer of complexity. My Aunt Patricia, my mother's younger sister, was perhaps the most genuine person in our family circle. Despite struggling financially as a single mother working 2 jobs, she always found ways to show up when it mattered most. She drove a 15-year-old Honda that made concerning noises, lived in a small apartment with her teenage son Marcus, and never complained about her circumstances or asked anyone for help. In stark contrast was my Aunt Rebecca, my father's older sister who had married into wealth and never let anyone forget her elevated status. She spent holidays critiquing everyone's life choices and making pointed comments about my career, apartment, and perpetually single status. My cousin Tyler, her son, had inherited her sense of entitlement, but none of her husband's business acumen, and struggled with a gambling problem that the family pretended not to acknowledge. My history with lending money to family members had left me cautious and disappointed. When Jessica needed $3,000 for a security deposit 2 years ago, I emptied most of my savings to help her, only to discover weeks later that she had spent the money on a vacation to Miami instead. When Michael needed help with his wedding expenses, I put $1,500 on my credit card that he promised to repay after their honeymoon. 3 years later, I was still making payments on that debt. When my father needed money to repair his car after an accident, I sent what I could, only to see photos on social media of him and Karen dining at expensive restaurants the following week. The only person who knew the full extent of these financial betrayals was my best friend Rachel. We had met at community college, and unlike most relationships in my life, ours had remained steady and honest. Rachel worked as a physical therapist, understood financial struggles, and never judged my complicated feelings about my family. She was the voice of reason when I felt myself becoming bitter, reminding me that not everyone was trying to take advantage of me, but also validating my frustrations when family members crossed boundaries at work. The environment was equally frustrating. My supervisor, Greg, had a habit of taking credit for my organizational improvements during meetings with the owner. My coworker, Janet, consistently arrived late and left early, forcing me to handle her responsibilities. Yet somehow she always received the same recognition I did. Despite being undervalued and overworked, I kept my head down and continued performing excellently, hoping that dedication would eventually be rewarded. Buying lottery tickets was my one small weekly indulgence, a ritual that my family loved to mock. Every Friday afternoon, I would stop at the convenience store near my apartment and spend $10 on tickets. My mother called it a tax on people who were bad at math. My brother joked that I should just hand him the money directly instead of throwing it away. My father lectured me about probability and the importance of investing in realistic opportunities. But those tickets represented something precious to me, a tiny possibility of freedom that I refused to give up even after years of winning nothing more than $20 here and there. I had dreams, naturally. I wanted to travel to see places beyond Colorado. I wanted to return to school, maybe earn a degree in something I was actually passionate about rather than just practical. I wanted to have enough savings that an unexpected car repair would not send me into financial panic mode. But these dreams seemed increasingly distant as I approached my mid-30s, still paying off student loans from community college, carrying credit card debt that never seemed to decrease despite careful budgeting and constant vigilance. Each month required careful calculation of bills, groceries, and the occasional dinner out with Rachel. I clipped coupons religiously, compared prices at 3 different grocery stores, and knew exactly which day each store marked down their clearance items. I drove a 12-year-old Toyota that made worrying sounds when it rained, but replacing it remained financially impossible. I had become an expert at appearing fine while constantly calculating expenses in my head, wondering if I could afford to accept an invitation or if I needed to decline and stay home instead. This was my reality before everything changed. Ordinary, sometimes challenging, occasionally lonely, but stable in its predictability. I had no idea how a single piece of paper was about to completely transform everything I thought I knew about myself and the people. I called family. The day I purchased the winning ticket was actually a Thursday, not my usual Friday routine. I had just finished a particularly stressful week at work where Greg had, once again, presented my cost-saving suggestions to the company owner as his own ideas. I stopped at Murphy's Corner Market on my way home, feeling frustrated and defeated. Murphy was a friendly older gentleman who had owned the store for over 25 years. He knew most of his regular customers by name and always had an encouraging word to share. "Hello, Sarah. Tough day?" Murphy asked as I approached the counter. The usual Friday tickets. "Hey, Murphy. Actually, make it $15 worth today instead of 10. I am feeling like I need some extra luck." Murphy smiled as he processed my purchase. Sometimes a little extra investment pays off. Maybe today is your day? Instead of my typical quick pick numbers, I decided to choose my own. I selected my birth date, 3rd and 18th, my mother's birthday, 24th, my father's birthday, 7th, Patricia's birthday, 11th, and Rachel's birthday, 29th. 6 numbers representing the most important people in my life, even those who had disappointed me repeatedly that evening. I ordered Chinese takeout from my favorite restaurant, opened a bottle of wine Rachel had given me for my birthday months earlier, and settled in for a quiet evening at home. The lottery drawing was scheduled for 8 o'clock, but I was barely paying attention as I scrolled through social media, seeing posts from acquaintances enjoying much more exciting lives than mine. At 8:45, I remembered the tickets and casually picked up my phone to check the results, expecting disappointment as usual. The first number matched 3. I felt a small flutter of hope. The second number matched 18. My heart rate increased slightly. Third number, 24. Fourth number, 7. My palms started sweating. Fifth number, 11. I was holding my breath now. Sixth and final number, 29. I stared at my phone screen for what felt like an eternity. This could not be real. I must have misread something. Checked the numbers again, then again. I switched to the official lottery website and compared each digit carefully. According to their records, I was the sole winner of $43 million. After taxes, it would be approximately $26 million. An incomprehensible amount for someone who had been excited earlier about finding a $5 bill in an old jacket pocket. Sleep was impossible that night. Instead, I spent hours researching lottery winners online, and what I discovered was deeply troubling. Stories of winners whose lives fell apart after their windfall became public knowledge. Families destroyed by greed and jealousy. Long-lost relatives and supposed friends appearing with elaborate sob stories and outstretched hands. Winners who were bankrupt within 10 years, more miserable than before they had ever won. One article described winning the lottery as the fastest way to lose everyone you care about. As sunrise approached, I made my decision. I would claim the money quietly, but I would tell absolutely no one about it. Not my parents, not my siblings, not even Rachel. At least not immediately. I needed time to understand what this meant, to make a proper plan, and to figure out what this money would do to my relationships before everyone else tried to tell me how to spend it. That morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in over 2 years and scheduled an appointment with Margaret Thompson, an attorney who specialized in financial planning and estate management. Her office was located in a downtown high-rise, and as I sat in the elegant waiting room in my ordinary work clothes, clutching my purse with the winning ticket inside, I felt completely out of place. Miss Mitchell, Margaret, greeted me professionally, extending her hand. She was in her 50s, with silver hair and intelligent eyes behind designer glasses. "What can I help you with today?" I took a deep breath and placed the lottery ticket on her polished desk. "I need to understand how to claim." This without anyone discovering it was me. Her eyes widened briefly as she examined the ticket. Then she nodded with professional composure. "I see. You have definitely come to the right place." Okay. Over the next 3 hours, Margaret explained all my options thoroughly. In Colorado, lottery winners could claim their prizes through legal trusts or business entities that would keep their identities completely private. She outlined the process of establishing a blind trust, explained how taxes would be calculated and paid, and stressed the importance of assembling a qualified team of financial advisors to help manage such a substantial sum responsibly. The biggest mistake winners make, she explained carefully, is telling too many people too quickly. Once that information is out there, there is absolutely no way to take it back. The change in relationships is immediate and usually permanent. I nodded, relieved that my instinct to keep this secret had been correct. "I want to handle this properly. I do not want this money to destroy my life or my relationships." Margaret smiled approvingly. "Then we will proceed very carefully and methodically." As I left Margaret's office with a folder containing detailed documents and a comprehensive list of next steps, I felt a strange combination of excitement and anxiety. One possessed more money than I had ever imagined possible. Yet I could not share this life-changing news with anyone who mattered to me. I would be living a double life, pretending to be the same struggling bookkeeper while secretly being a multimillionaire. The weight of that deception felt heavier than I had anticipated. Over the following 3 weeks, I worked closely with Margaret to establish the trust, officially claim the winnings, and set up diversified investment accounts. We created a detailed financial plan that would ensure I would never need to worry about money again, even if I lived to be 100 years old. The money was real now, sitting in accounts under my control, earning more in a single day than I used to make in a month. Yet my daily routine remained exactly the same. I continued going to work, still complained about money with coworkers, still drove my aging Toyota with its mysterious rattling sounds. The secrecy was beginning to feel burdensome. I found myself wondering constantly about my family members. Would they be genuinely happy for me if they knew about my good fortune? Would they respect reasonable boundaries? Or would they immediately start seeing me as nothing more than a walking ATM machine? These questions haunted my thoughts, and gradually an idea began forming in my mind. What if there was a way to discover how my family would react to my wealth without actually revealing the truth about my lottery win? What if I could somehow test their character and loyalty before deciding who deserved to share in my secret? The plan took shape slowly but steadily. I would create a scenario where I desperately needed financial assistance. Not an enormous amount, but enough to be meaningful and challenging. I would approach each family member individually with the same fabricated story, the same specific request for help, and observe who would actually step up to assist me without any expectation of personal gain. Only then would I know for certain who truly cared about me as a person, rather than what I might be able to provide for them. The next day, I met with Margaret again to ensure all my finances were properly protected. Before proceeding with my plan, we had established a comprehensive investment portfolio, set up charitable giving trusts for future philanthropy, and created a modest personal checking account that would allow me to access funds without raising suspicion. The vast majority of my winnings were safely invested and completely untouchable by anyone except me. Everything is securely in place. Sarah, Margaret assured me, sliding another folder across her desk. Your financial future is completely protected. You could stop working immediately if you chose to. The thought was incredibly tempting, but I realized that suddenly quitting my job would definitely raise questions I was not prepared to answer. I think I will continue working for now, I replied carefully. At least until I figure out some other things in my life. Margaret nodded understandingly. Take all the time you need. There is no rush to make any major life changes. That evening, I invited Rachel over for dinner at my apartment. As we sat on my small balcony sharing a bottle of wine, I decided to discuss part of my plan with her. I could not keep everything completely bottled up inside, and I trusted her judgment more than anyone else in my life. I had been thinking about doing a kind of experiment with my family. I began cautiously, testing the waters. Rachel raised her eyebrows with obvious curiosity. What kind of experiment are you talking about? I took a careful breath before continuing. I want to tell them that I lost my job and desperately need financial help, just to see who would actually be willing to help me when I truly need it. Rachel's expression immediately shifted from curiosity to serious concern. Sarah, that sounds incredibly manipulative and potentially harmful. Why would you want to do something like that? Because I am completely tired of being the only person. Whoever helps when others are in financial trouble, I said, struggling to keep my voice level and calm. I want to know who would actually be there for me if our situations were reversed for once. But lying to people you care about to test their loyalty, that does not sound like you at all, Rachel said firmly, setting down her wine glass. Why not? Just have honest conversations with them about how their behavior has made you feel. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Right, because my family is so wonderful at having honest, productive conversations about anything meaningful. You have seen how they treat me. Rachel, you have witnessed their behavior firsthand multiple times. Rachel shook her head slowly. I understand that you feel hurt and taken advantage of, and those feelings are completely valid. But this plan could damage your relationships in ways you cannot predict or control. What are you really trying to prove? I am not trying to prove anything specific, I insisted, though even as I said it, I knew that was not entirely true. I just want to know who actually cares about me as a person versus who only sees me as a convenient resource to tap when they need something. Rachel studied my face carefully. Sarah, I know that look. You have already made up your mind about this, have you not? She was absolutely right. I had spent the previous day carefully crafting my story, making sure it would be believable, but not so dramatic that it would raise immediate suspicion. I would tell everyone that the construction company I worked for had unexpectedly lost its biggest client and was forced to lay off half the staff, including me. I would explain that I needed $4,000 to cover rent, utilities, and car insurance until I could find another position. It was a substantial amount, but not completely unreasonable, and certainly within the financial means of most of my family members, who had steady jobs and established lives. I compiled a mental list of everyone I intended to approach. My mother, Linda and stepfather David, my father Robert and stepmother Karen, my sister Jessica, my brother Michael and his wife Emma, my aunt Patricia, my aunt Rebecca, and my cousin Tyler. 9 people total, all of whom had asked me for help at various times, all of whom I had supported either financially or emotionally when they needed assistance. The following day, spent time with Rachel practicing my story, even though she continued to express serious reservations about my plan. You need to sound genuinely worried but not completely desperate, she advised reluctantly. And make sure you have specific details ready about the company's situation in case they ask follow-up questions. I nodded, taking careful notes. I will explain that the owner had been struggling with cash flow problems for months, but kept it hidden. From employees, the client that dropped them represented about 60% of their revenue. And without that contract, there was no way to maintain the current staff size. I will say that I have been actively applying for other positions, but the job market is competitive. And I have had some unexpected car repair expenses that depleted my emergency savings. I had considered every detail thoroughly, creating a scenario that would naturally evoke sympathy without seeming suspicious or overly dramatic. As I finalized my approach, I felt that familiar twinge of guilt returning. Was Rachel right about this being manipulative? But then I remembered all the times I had emptied my bank account to help these same people, often struggling financially, for months afterward, and my determination returned stronger than before. This was not just about testing them anymore. This was about protecting myself and understanding the true nature of our relationships before making any decisions about my future. I created a prediction list of how I expected each person to respond. My mother would probably offer some help, but less than I actually needed, and would suggest asking other family members first. My father would likely lecture me about financial responsibility, but might eventually send a small amount. Jessica would claim she could not help due to her own financial struggles. Michael would say he needed to discuss it with Emma first, then come up with an excuse. David and Karen would refuse directly and suggest I find a cheaper apartment. Aunt Rebecca would somehow turn it into criticism of my life choices. Cousin Tyler would promise help that would never actually materialize. The only person I felt genuinely hopeful about was Aunt Patricia. Despite having the least financial resources among all of them, she had always been the most generous with whatever she could manage. But even with her, I tried to keep my expectations reasonable. $4,000 represented a significant amount for a single mother working 2 jobs and supporting a teenager. My strategy was set. Over the next 10 days, I would contact each family member individually, tell them my fabricated story, and carefully observe who would step up to help when I needed it most. Only then would I decide who truly deserved to know about my lottery winnings. Only then would I understand who actually cared about me beyond what I could provide for them. With a mixture of anticipation and dread, I picked up my phone to make the first call. It was time to discover who my real family was and who had just been using me all these years. I decided to start with my mother. She had always prided herself on being a caring, supportive parent, frequently reminding my siblings and me about all the sacrifices she had made while raising us as a single mother after the divorce. If anyone would offer to help, I believed it would be her. My hands shook slightly as I dialed her familiar number. She answered after 4 rings, and I could hear the television playing in the background. "Hi, Mom," I said, intentionally making my voice sound strained and worried. "Sarah, honey, is everything okay? You sound upset." I launched into my carefully prepared story, explaining about the company suddenly losing its major client, the unexpected layoffs, and my precarious financial situation. As I spoke, I could hear her breathing change, becoming more concerned with each detail I shared. "Oh, sweetie, that is absolutely terrible," she said when I finished explaining. "Have you filed for unemployment benefits yet? What about your emergency savings fund?" I explained that unemployment would take several weeks to process and start paying, and that my emergency savings had been depleted by some unexpected car repairs the previous month. "Mom, I hate asking this, but I desperately need help. About $4,000 to cover my rent and essential bills until I can find another job. I promise I will pay you back as soon as I get back on my feet." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear her thinking. "Oh, Sarah, you know David and I just made a large down payment on that timeshare in Florida. We are pretty cash poor right now." Her voice took on a slightly defensive tone that I recognized immediately. "Have you tried asking your father? Or maybe Michael? He and Emma are doing well financially with his new promotion." I was hoping to avoid asking Dad if possible, I said honestly. "And Michael has the mortgage and the twins to think about." "I understand your situation with the timeshare, Mom. I just thought maybe you could help with part of it." "Well, let me discuss it with David and see what we might be able to do," she said finally. "But I cannot make any promises. You know how careful he is with our budget, especially when it comes to, well, you understand." I did understand, unfortunately. David had never considered my siblings and me to be his financial responsibility, making it clear from the beginning of their marriage that his money was for my mother and any children they might have together, which they never did. "Okay, Mom, just let me know as soon as possible," I said, keeping my voice steady. "My rent is due next week, and I am really worried about making it. I will call you tomorrow night, sweetie. Sarah, I am so sorry about your job. These things have a way of working out for the best, though. Maybe this is the universe telling you to look for something better, something more stable and secure." After hanging up, I wrote down her response in a notebook I had started specifically for this experiment. She had expressed appropriate concern and sympathy, but immediately began looking for ways to redirect the responsibility to someone else in the family. She had not refused outright, but I suspected her conversation with David would conveniently result in them being unable to provide any meaningful assistance. The next day, I called my father, Robert. I chose to call him during his lunch break, thinking he might be more receptive when he was not distracted by work responsibilities. "You sound tired, Sarah," was his greeting as he answered the phone. I forced a weak smile into my voice and began explaining my situation. His response was exactly what I had predicted, somehow still disappointing to hear. As I told him about losing my job and needing financial help, his face remained completely neutral, occasionally making small acknowledgement sounds. When I finished by asking for $4,000 in assistance, he leaned back in his chair, and I could practically see him crossing his arms even over the phone. "Sarah, I have always taught you about the importance of financial responsibility and proper planning," he began, slipping into what I privately called his teacher voice. "This situation is exactly why I have repeatedly advised you to maintain at least 6 months of living expenses in savings at all times. What happened to that emergency fund we discussed?" "Life happened, Dad," I replied, working to keep frustration out of my voice. "Car repairs, medical bills, unexpected expenses. Not everyone can afford to set aside that much money while still paying rent and student loans." He sighed heavily, and I could hear the disappointment in his breath. "And now you expect family members to bail you out of poor planning. What about your spending habits? Do you really need that apartment in such an expensive neighborhood? About your cable bill and those streaming services you mentioned." For the next 25 minutes, he delivered a lecture about financial planning, the current job market, and the importance of living below one's means. Not once during this entire conversation did he offer any actual assistance or support. Finally, he concluded with what felt like a prepared speech. "Sarah, I would love to help you, but Karen and I are in the middle of planning for our retirement. We cannot afford to jeopardize our financial security by dipping into those funds. It would be irresponsible of us." He paused, and I could hear the condescension in his voice. "This will be a valuable learning experience for you. Sometimes people need to face real consequences before they make necessary changes in their lives." I thanked him for his time and advice, though it had been neither helpful nor supportive. Even though I had expected this response, it still stung to hear him dismiss my needs so casually while lecturing me about responsibility. I added his response to my notebook, noting that he had managed to turn my request for help into an opportunity to criticize my life choices. My sister Jessica came next. I drove to her apartment on a Saturday afternoon, knowing she would be home, and hopefully in a good mood. Jessica had always been dramatic and emotional, so I expected either an extreme response of sympathy or complete dismissal. "Sarah, what a surprise!" she exclaimed when she opened her door. Come in, come in. I just made coffee." Her small studio apartment was cluttered but cozy, with artwork covering most of the walls and plants in every available corner. As we sat on her futon sharing coffee from mismatched mugs, I explained my employment situation and financial crisis. "Oh my God, that is horrible," she gasped dramatically, reaching across her coffee table to squeeze my hand. "I cannot believe they would just eliminate positions like that without any warning. That should be illegal." Her sympathy seemed genuine, and for a moment I felt a flicker of hope that maybe she would actually offer to help. Then I mentioned needing to borrow $4,000 to cover essential expenses. Her expression shifted subtly, and she suddenly became very interested in arranging the magazines on her coffee table. "Oh," she said slowly, her voice changing noticeably. "Well, that is actually really bad timing. I just had to put a new transmission in my car last month. That completely wiped out my savings account." She glanced around her apartment nervously, as if looking for additional excuses. "Plus, I am between freelance projects right now, so money is pretty tight for me too. I just spent my last bit of extra cash on art supplies for this commission I am working on." She paused, then brightened artificially. "But maybe I could help in other ways. You could crash here for a few weeks if you need to save on rent. I've got a sleeping bag and the couch pulls out." I thanked her for the offer, but explained that I needed to stay in my apartment to maintain stability during my job search, and that most potential employers would expect me to have a permanent address. She promised to think about whether she could help financially. But the way she avoided making eye contact told me everything I needed to know about the likelihood of that happening. My brother, Michael, was perhaps the most predictable and disappointing. Response: I sent him a detailed text message explaining my situation and asking if we could talk. His response came 3 hours later and consisted of one sentence: "That really sucks. Sarah, Emma, and I are pretty stretched thin with the house payments and the girls' expenses. But we will see what we can do." When I followed up with a phone call the next day, he spent most of the conversation talking about how expensive it was to raise twins, the cost of their private preschool, and Emma's part-time graduate school program. He never directly refused to help, but he made it clear that my financial crisis was far less important than their lifestyle maintenance. He suggested I consider moving back home with Mom and David temporarily, apparently forgetting that I was 32 years old and that they lived in a one-bedroom apartment, my stepfather. David was characteristically blunt when I called him directly. "Sarah, your mother mentioned your employment situation, and I am sorry that happened to you. However, Linda and I have our own financial obligations and retirement planning to consider. Perhaps this is an opportunity for you to develop better money management skills." He suggested I look into financial counseling services and mentioned that the local community college offered budgeting classes. Karen, my stepmother, was even less sympathetic. When I explained my situation, she immediately began questioning my spending habits and life choices. Have you considered getting a roommate to split expenses? What about moving to a less expensive area? Maybe this is a sign that you should think about changing career paths to something more lucrative and stable. She managed to make my job loss sound like a personal failing rather than an unfortunate circumstance beyond my control. Aunt Rebecca's response was predictably judgmental and unhelpful. Well, Sarah, I always said that construction companies were unstable employers. You should have listened when I suggested applying for that position at the bank 3 years ago. She then proceeded to lecture me about financial planning and tell me stories about other family members who had overcome employment challenges through hard work and determination, implying that I simply was not trying hard enough. My cousin Tyler initially seemed sympathetic and even promised to definitely help out with some money. He suggested meeting for lunch so he could give me a check directly. But when the scheduled day arrived, he texted me an hour beforehand saying something urgent had come up and he would need to reschedule. He never did reschedule and eventually stopped responding to my messages entirely. I later discovered through social media that he had spent that afternoon at a casino, apparently having found money for gambling but not for helping his cousin. In crisis. After 10 days of rejections, excuses, and empty promises, I was emotionally exhausted despite having expected these responses. The experiment had confirmed my worst fears about my family's priorities. But experiencing their indifference firsthand was still painful. 8 people who had repeatedly asked for and received my help over the years could not, or would not return the favor when I genuinely needed assistance. Then my phone rang, and I saw Aunt Patricia's name on the display. Patricia, honey, I just heard from your mother about your job situation. Are you doing okay? Her voice was filled with genuine warmth and concern. I had not actually reached out to Patricia, yet planning to call her the following day. The fact that she had contacted me first after hearing about my situation through family gossip spoke volumes about her character and priorities. I am managing, I said, and this time the emotion in my voice was completely real rather than fabricated. Can we get together for coffee tomorrow? I would really like to see you, and maybe we can talk. Of course, sweetie. How about that little cafe near my work around noon? And Sarah, I want you to know that whatever is going on, you are not alone in this. The next day, we met at a small family-owned cafe near the elementary school where Patricia worked as a teacher's aide. She looked exactly as she always did. Her graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing comfortable jeans and a cardigan with small holes near the elbows. She hugged me tightly before we sat down, and I could feel the genuine care in her embrace. I am so sorry about your job, honey. That company never deserved someone as dedicated and hardworking as you anyway. As we talked over coffee and shared a piece of pie, she asked thoughtful questions about my job search and offered to reach out to some former colleagues who might have connections in the business world. She listened without judgment as I explained my financial concerns. Then, after we had finished eating, she reached into her worn purse and pulled out a white envelope. Sarah, I want you to take this, she said, sliding it across the small table. It is $2,500. I know it is not the full amount you mentioned needing, but it should help with your rent and give you a little breathing room while you find something new. I stared at the envelope in complete shock, unable to speak for several moments. Patricia, I cannot accept this. This is too much money for you to be giving away. She reached across the table and took my hand gently, but firmly. Nonsense, sweetie. Family helps family when times get tough. And I want you to know something else that is important. If you need a place to stay to save money on rent, my couch turns into a decent bed. It is not luxurious, but you would be welcome to stay as long as necessary. Tears filled my eyes, and this time they were completely genuine. Thank you, I whispered, overwhelmed by her incredible generosity and kindness. Now, do not worry about paying this back right away, she continued with a gentle smile. Focus on getting back on your feet first. Find a job that actually appreciates your skills and treats you well. Life is too short to work for people who do not value what you bring to the table. As we left the cafe together, Patricia hugged me. Again, you are going to be perfectly fine, Sarah. You are intelligent, capable, and strong. This is just a temporary setback, not a permanent situation. Trust me on that. Driving home afterward, I held the envelope containing $2,500. More money than I suspected Patricia could comfortably spare. The contrast between her immediate, generous response and the rest of my family's behavior could not have been more striking. The only person who had offered genuine, meaningful help was the one with the least financial resources. That evening, I did some research that left me stunned and deeply moved. $2,500 represented nearly all of Patricia's savings account. I discovered through casual conversation with my mother that Patricia had been quietly dealing with some health issues that required expensive medications not fully covered by her insurance. She had been taking on extra tutoring work in the evenings and weekends to help cover the additional medical costs. Yet she had given me almost everything she had without hesitation or conditions. The realization hit me with tremendous force. Patricia, who had so little disposable income, had given me practically everything she could spare without asking questions or demanding guarantees of repayment. Meanwhile, my mother and David, who had recently spent $8,000 renovating their kitchen, claimed they could not spare $4,000 to help their daughter cover basic living expenses during an employment crisis the next day. I invited Patricia to my apartment for dinner. As she settled onto my secondhand couch with a cup of tea, I noticed for the first time how tired she looked. And I realized I had been so focused on my own problems that I had not been paying attention to hers. Patricia, there is something I need to tell you, and it is very important. I began, setting my own cup down carefully. I have not been completely honest about my situation. Her expression remained calm and open, more curious than concerned. What do you mean, honey? I did not actually lose my job, I said quickly, the words rushing out. The construction company is fine, and I am still employed there. I made up that story to test how different family members would respond if I really needed help. I wanted to see who would actually be there for me in a crisis. Patricia was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly and thoughtfully. I see, she said simply. Are you upset with me? I asked, suddenly afraid of losing the one genuine relationship I had discovered through this entire experiment. She considered the question carefully before responding. No, I am not angry with you. I am sad that you felt like you needed to test people in order to understand who cares about you, but I think I understand why you did it. Our family has not always treated you fairly or kindly, and that has probably made it difficult for you to trust people's motivations. You were the only person who offered to help, told her honestly. Everyone else had excuses or lectures about responsibility, or they simply ignored me completely. Patricia sighed deeply. People reveal their true character when helping becomes inconvenient or costly. I learned that lesson myself many years ago. What do you mean? I asked, settling back into my chair. She set down her teacup and folded her hands in her lap, looking thoughtful. Did I ever tell you the real story about why Marcus's father and I divorced? I shook my head. The family had always been vague about the details, saying only that they had grown apart over time. I inherited some money when my grandmother died, she began quietly, about $35,000. Not a fortune by any means, but significant for us at the time, especially with a young child. Tom immediately had all these plans for that. Money, mostly involving investments in his friend's various business ventures. She smiled sadly at the memory. I wanted to save most of it for Marcus's education and our future security. Maybe put a down payment on a small house eventually? We argued about it constantly for months. What happened? I asked, though I suspected I already knew where this story was heading. One day I came home from work to find that he had forged my signature and withdrawn almost all of the money. By the time I discovered what he had done, it was already gone. Invested in a restaurant that failed within 8 months. She shook her head at the painful memory. When I confronted him about it, do you know what he told me? That it was our money, not just mine, and he had every right to make decisions about how to use it. As if the inheritance being specifically left to me meant absolutely nothing. I was shocked and angry on her behalf. I had no idea any of that had happened. The family always preferred the growing apart explanation, she said with a slight smile, much less messy and complicated than the truth. But the experience taught me something valuable about money and relationships, Sarah. She looked directly at me. Money does not just reveal who other people truly are. It shows us who we are too. How we use it, how we share it, how we think about it. It is like a mirror that reflects our deepest values and priorities. Her words resonated with me more deeply than I had expected. In that moment, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and absolutely right. Patricia, there is something else. I need to tell you. Something much bigger and more important. I took a deep breath. 3 weeks ago, I won the lottery. $43 million. Her eyes widened considerably, but she remained silent, waiting for me to continue explaining. I've not told anyone else about it. Not my parents, not my siblings, not even Rachel. You are the first person to know the truth. Oh my goodness. Sarah, she breathed softly. That is absolutely life-changing. I know it is. And that is exactly why I did this test with everyone. I needed to understand who would be there for me without knowing about the money. Who would care about me just as a person rather than as a potential source of financial benefit? Patricia nodded slowly. Understanding. Dawning in her expression. That makes complete sense to me. But what are you planning to do now? That is what I am still trying to figure out, I admitted. The money is secure and I have excellent financial advisors helping me manage it responsibly. But I do not know how to handle the family situation or whether I should tell anyone else. Patricia considered this carefully. You know that you do not owe anyone anything, Sarah. Not even me. The money is yours and you get to decide what to do with it and who to share that information with. But I want to help you, I said earnestly. Your medical expenses, a better living situation, whatever you need. Marcus's college fund. I want to make sure you are comfortable and secure. She smiled gently and reached over to pat my hand. I appreciate that more than you can possibly know, sweetheart. But I do not need anything from you except your friendship and happiness. My apartment is small, but it is filled with things I love. My car runs most of the time, and when it does not, I have good friends who help out. I have my students, my books, and now this wonderful secret that my favorite niece is financially secure for life. She squeezed my hand affectionately. Just knowing that you will never have to worry about money again is enough for me. Her complete lack of self-interest brought tears to my eyes. Here was someone who had given me nearly everything she had when she thought I was in crisis. And now that she knew I had millions, she was asking for nothing except my well-being and happiness. The contrast with the rest of my family was so stark it was almost unbelievable. As we continued talking late into the evening, I began to understand how dramatically my experiment had clarified not just my family relationships, but my own values and priorities. While I had been conducting my test, word had inevitably spread through the family about my supposed financial troubles. Instead of generating concern or offers of help, it had mainly created gossip and judgment. My phone had been buzzing throughout the week with messages that revealed more about my family's character than I had wanted to know. My mother had texted, "Heard you ask Michael for money too? You should have told me you were asking everyone. Makes it seem like you're playing us against each other." Another message came from my father. "Karen tells me you have been calling family members asking for handouts. This is exactly the kind of irresponsible behavior I have been trying to help you avoid." The family had turned my request for assistance into evidence of personal failure rather than an opportunity to demonstrate love and support. In doing so, They had shown me exactly who they were when compassion became inconvenient. But they had also shown me who I was and who I wanted to become with this unexpected gift I had been given. The morning after my conversation with Patricia, I contacted Margaret to discuss my long-term plans now that I had clarity about my personal, ultimate relationships. I want to establish a trust fund for Patricia, I told her during our meeting. Something that will cover her medical expenses completely and provide her with a comfortable retirement, but structured in a way that feels like a family gift rather than charity. She is very proud and independent. Margaret nodded approvingly and made detailed notes. We can structure it as a family education trust that provides monthly payments for her and her son. She would not have to manage a large lump sum all at once, which can feel overwhelming for people who are not accustomed to significant wealth. That sounds perfect, I said. And I want to purchase a small house for her, somewhere near wherever I decide to settle permanently. Nothing extravagant, just comfortable and accessible for someone dealing with health challenges. We spent the next 2 hours discussing investment strategies, charitable giving options, and my own future living arrangements. I had decided to give my notice at the construction company and focus on establishing a nonprofit foundation dedicated to helping elderly people living alone, particularly those who had been estranged from their families or who lacked adequate support systems. Patricia's situation and researching others like hers had shown me how many people were struggling in isolation simply because they had no one to advocate for them or provide assistance. What about the rest of your family? Margaret asked carefully. Do you have any plans to tell them about your winnings eventually? I shook my head firmly. Not now, and possibly not ever. But I do want to arrange some kind of family meeting to address the lies I told during my experiment. I owe them honesty about that, even if they do not deserve to know about the lottery later that day. I called Charlotte and finally told her the complete truth about everything. The lottery win, the family experiment, and what I had discovered about the people closest to me. After her initial shock and excitement about the money, she quickly understood the deeper implications of what had happened. So, what happens now? She asked. Are you going to become one of those mysterious millionaires who still drives an old car and clips coupons? I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. No, but I am not going to suddenly start buying designer handbags and sports cars either. I want this money to have meaning, to accomplish something positive. Charlotte agreed wholeheartedly. And what about your family? The ones who disappointed you? I am still working that out, I said honestly. I have scheduled a family gathering for this Sunday. I told everyone I have an important announcement to make. When Sunday arrived, I was surprised by how many people actually showed up at my apartment. My mother and David, my father and Karen, Jessica, Michael, and Emma, even Aunt Rebecca, who rarely attended family gatherings unless there was something in it for her. Patricia arrived last, giving me a subtle, encouraging smile as she found a seat. As everyone settled into my small living room, looking around with varying degrees of curiosity and judgment at my modest surroundings. I stood in front of them, feeling remarkably calm and centered. Thank you all for coming, I began. I know there have been rumors and discussions about my employment situation recently, and I wanted to address that directly and honestly. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her chair. David suddenly became very interested in his phone. Jessica looked nervous, and Michael exchanged glances with Emma. The truth is, I am fine professionally, I continued. I have not lost my job, and the construction company is doing well. I will be leaving that position soon, but by choice, not because of layoffs or financial problems. Well, that is wonderful news, my mother said with obvious relief, though there was also confusion in her voice. We have all been so worried about you, but why all the drama about needing money if everything was fine? Because I wanted to understand something important about our family relationships, I replied calmly. When I thought I was in real trouble, I reached out to people I believed cared about me. I wanted to see who would actually be there when I needed help, not just when I could provide help to others. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Several people avoided making eye contact with me. My father looked annoyed rather than ashamed. "So this was some kind of test?" he asked, his tone accusatory. "You lied to everyone just to see what we would do." I tested whether the people who have repeatedly asked me for financial assistance over the years would be willing to return that favor when I needed it, said, meeting his gaze directly. And I learned exactly what I needed to know about the true nature of our relationships. The meeting continued for another uncomfortable hour, with various family members offering excuses, justifications, and even attempts to blame me for putting them in an awkward position. No one acknowledged their lack of support or expressed regret about their responses to my supposed crisis. Most concerning was how many of them seemed more upset about being tested than about failing the test. As people began leaving, Kay making awkward goodbyes and muttering about feeling manipulated, I felt a strange sense of closure rather than sadness. I had not told them about the lottery winnings, but I had been completely honest about everything else. The money had given me something far more valuable than wealth. It had given me the courage to see my relationships clearly and to set appropriate boundaries. Patricia stayed behind after everyone else had left, helping me clean up the coffee cups and plates. "You handled that very well," she said quietly. "That could not have been easy, but you were honest and direct without being cruel." "It was not as difficult as I expected," I replied, loading dishes into the dishwasher. "I think the money has given me a different perspective on what really matters and what does not." 1 year later, my life looked completely different from the day I first checked those lottery numbers. I had moved into a beautiful but modest house in a quiet neighborhood, with a garden that brought me joy every morning. Just 2 blocks away was Patricia's new home, a charming single-story cottage with wide doorways and a beautiful sunroom where she spent hours reading and working on her quilting projects. My nonprofit foundation had grown beyond anything I had originally envisioned. We provided companionship, home maintenance, financial assistance, and advocacy services to elderly people living alone, with a special focus on those who had been abandoned or rejected by their families. The work was more rewarding than anything I had ever done professionally. And we had already helped over 300 seniors in our metropolitan area. Rachel had eventually joined the organization as our community outreach coordinator, bringing her healthcare background and natural compassion to our mission. She and I still had our weekly coffee dates, though now they took place in my comfortable kitchen rather than in cramped apartment spaces or noisy cafes. My relationship with most of my family had evolved into something more distant, but also more honest. I maintained polite contact with my parents and siblings, exchanging birthday cards and holiday greetings. But the pretense of deep emotional connection had fallen away, without the expectation of intimacy that had never really existed. Our interactions became less painful and complicated. Interestingly, there had been several occasions when family members genuinely needed help, and I had provided it anonymously, through various charitable channels. When my father required unexpected surgery and faced significant medical bills, I arranged for the hospital's patient assistance program to cover his expenses. When Jessica finally decided to pursue treatment for her depression and anxiety, I made an anonymous donation to cover her therapy costs. When Michael and Emma's daughter needed specialized tutoring for a learning disability, I funded it through an educational grant program I had established. They never discovered the source of these gifts, and I preferred it that way. It allowed me to help when appropriate without reopening complicated emotional dynamics or creating new expectations and dependencies. Martha and I had dinner together at least 3 times every week, alternating between her house and mine. Her health had improved dramatically with proper medical care and reduced financial stress. She had been able to retire from her teaching. Jabba continued volunteering with adult literacy programs because she loved working with students. "You know what still amazes me?" she said one evening as we sat on her porch watching the sunset. "How differently everything could have turned Out if you had announced your lottery win immediately without testing anyone first. I nodded, thinking about that alternative reality. The family would have suddenly become very attentive and affectionate, I said. I would have been surrounded by people who claimed to love me, but I never would have known what was real and what was motivated by money. And you would have missed the most important discovery, Patricia added thoughtfully. That knowledge, painful as it was to acquire, gave you the freedom to build authentic relationships based on truth rather than obligation or expectation. She was absolutely right. The experiment had been emotionally difficult, but it had shown me who deserved a place in my life and who did not. It had revealed the difference between people who saw me as a person and those who saw me as a resource to be utilized. Most importantly, it had taught me that real love and genuine care do not keep score or set conditions. They give freely without expectation of return, and they show up consistently rather than just when it is convenient or beneficial. The greatest lesson I learned had nothing to do with my family's failures and everything to do with understanding my own worth. Before the lottery, I had measured my value by what I could provide for others, constantly trying to earn love and acceptance through financial sacrifice and emotional availability. I had allowed myself to be taken advantage of because I believed that was what family relationships required. Okay, now I understood that authentic love, the kind Patricia had shown me, does not operate on a transaction basis. It gives generously, but also respects boundaries and dignity. It offers support without creating dependency, and it remains constant regardless of external circumstances. My life was now rich in ways that had nothing to do with my bank account balance. I had purpose through my foundation work, genuine connection with Patricia and Rachel, and a deep understanding of my own value that no amount of external validation or criticism could shake. Perhaps most importantly, I had peace. The constant anxiety about money that had been my lifelong companion was gone. But so was the desperate need for approval from people incapable of providing authentic love. I had built a life aligned with my values rather than my insecurities, and the difference was transformative. Patricia reached over and squeezed my hand, bringing me back to the present moment. You did something remarkable, Sarah, not just with the money, but with what you chose to learn from having it. I smiled at her, overwhelmed with gratitude for this woman who had shown me what family truly meant. I had an excellent teacher. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this peaceful moment. From the shock of matching those 6 lottery numbers to the pain of family, rejection to the joy of creating something meaningful with my unexpected fortune, the money had changed my life, but not in the ways I had initially feared or hoped. It had simply given me the freedom to see clearly and choose wisely. The most valuable thing I had gained was not the millions in investment accounts. It was the understanding that worth is not determined by what you can give to others, but by who you choose to become when you have the power to choose freely. Have you ever discovered something about your family that completely changed how you saw your relationships? What did you learn about the people closest to you when times got difficult? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story made you think about your own family dynamics, please hit like and subscribe to hear more real-life stories that might change your perspective on loyalty, money, and what family really means. Remember to share this with someone who might need to hear that their worth is not measured by what they can provide for others. Thank you for listening, and remember that the most important relationships in your life are those that value you for who you are, not what you can do for them.